Good afternoon. My name is Ed Ray Goins, and I'm a professor at Pomona College. My co-PI is Robin Wilson, who is a professor at Cal Poly Pomona. Today, we'd like to present to you MADDER, that is, Mathematicians of the African Diaspora Databases Ensemble of Researchers. We're very grateful to CURM for giving us the opportunity to have researchers from Pomona College and Cal Poly Pomona, they're only located about 3 miles or 15 minutes apart from each other, to help to study the history of Black mathematicians. In order to talk about the project today, I'd like to begin with a relatively simple question. Who are some African American mathematicians? To help answer this question, let's focus on the first African Americans who received PhDs in mathematics. The very first is Elbert Frank Cox. He is originally from Southern Indiana, actually from Evansville, but he received his PhD from Cornell University in 1925. He would eventually go on to become Department Chair of Mathematics at Howard University, a historically Black college in Washington, D.C. The second is Dudley Weldon Woodard. He received his PhD from the University of Pennsylvania in 1928. When he graduated, he went to Howard University. Actually, he was a professor at Howard University before he went to get his PhD. And he decided to establish a Master's of Science program in mathematics at Howard the very next year in 1929. The first graduate of this master's program is the third African American to receive his PhD in math, William Shifflin Claytor. Claytor was from the Washington, D.C. area where he went to Howard as an undergraduate. Eventually, he got a master's program at Howard and was mentored by Woodard and Cox. Claytor graduated from the master's program in 1930, and that year Woodard convinced Claytor to go on to get a PhD from the University of Pennsylvania with the same advisor that Woodard himself had had just a couple of years before. Claytor graduated with a PhD in math from the University of Pennsylvania in 1933. He would eventually go on to become the first African American to publish mathematics research. The fourth African American to receive a PhD in math is Walter Richard Talbot. He received his PhD from the University of Pittsburgh in 1935. He would go on to become math department chair at Morgan State University, a historically Black college in Baltimore. These are the first 4 African American men to receive their PhDs in math. But what about the first African American women? The very first is Euphemia Lofton Haynes. She received her PhD from Catholic University of America in 1943, and she would go on to become very involved in the public school system in Washington, D.C. The second is Evelyn Boyd Granville. She received her PhD from Yale University in 1949. She would go on to be a math professor at various colleges and universities around the country, Fisk University, a historically Black college in Tennessee, being one of them. And the third is Marjorie Lee Brown. She received her PhD from the University of Michigan in 1950. There's a colloquium series established in her name at the University of Michigan where they bring in a mathematician to talk about their works, roughly in January, right around Martin Luther King's Day of every year. But now, these were the first several Black mathematicians to get their degrees. What about more current Black mathematicians? Let me talk a little bit about some of the research that's done by Black mathematicians today. The first that I'll mention is Floyd Williams. In 1972, he received his PhD from Washington University. He works on problems in mathematical physics, especially problems related to relativity, black holes, and quantum mechanics, all using Lie groups. The next I'll mention is Kate Okikiolu. She's a Nigerian mathematician who, in 1991, received her PhD from the University of California at Los Angeles. She studied frequencies exhibited by drums in three-dimensional space. Arlie Petters is the next that we'll mention. In 1991, he received his PhD from MIT, and he works in gravitational lensing. Think of this as gravity itself folds space, and you can almost think of gravity as perhaps rippling through space, the way that you would say here sound going through air. The next I'll mention is Trishette Jackson. In 1998, she received her PhD from the University of Washington, and she studies the mathematics of how cancer spreads, actually how blood vessels grow towards cancer tumors. This is called angiogenesis. The next is Jonathan Mboyo Esele. In 2006, he received his PhD from Lawrence Institute at Leiden University. He studies mathematical physics, and in particular, he's interested in studying string theory by considering families of elliptic curves. And the last I'll mention for today is Chelsea Walton. In 2011, she received her PhD from the University of Michigan. She studies non-commutative algebraic geometry. Now that I've mentioned some names of Black mathematicians, the next question I'll ask is, who is keeping track of these names and of these stories? Well, the first person that I'm aware of who did this is Scott Warner Williams. He's a professor at SUNY Buffalo who studied topology. He worked on a series of web pages that he called the MADDER pages, that is, Mathematicians of the African Diaspora. Whenever he would meet a mathematician, he would just create a web page, and out of a labor of love, he would eventually put together a website that would keep track of stories and biographies and pictures of various Black mathematicians. Scott Williams introduced this site in 1997, and today there are more than 1,000 pages featuring biographies and stories. Unfortunately, he retired and stopped updating the pages in 2008. Several of us decided that we needed to get together and update the MADDER pages so that the world would have the most up-to-date information. Myself, along with Don King, who's a professor at Northeastern University in Boston, Asamoah Inkwanta, who is department chair at Morgan State University in Baltimore, and John Weaver, who is the CEO of Varsity Software, a web hosting company, all decided to update the pages to the new site that you see here. You can actually find the site at mathad.com. We completely changed over the structure from the original way that Scott Williams had a site, and that now everything corresponds to a database. The four of us have been working since 2010 to update the pages, and now there are more than 800 names in the new MADDER pages database. Let me spend some time saying a little bit about what are some features of the new pages. First, you'll notice that the new pages has a completely different and updated look. Here's an example of Tolupe Oke, who is a professor at Wake Forest University. You can actually go to the link at the bottom of the page and take a look at the site here. Another that I'll mention here is actually featured of Talitha Washington. We worked with MathSciNet to use the API so that publications on MathSciNet automatically populate into the MADDER pages database. John Weaver has been working with Ed Dunn at Math Reviews to get this API to work, and I'm very grateful for the two of them. And finally, we have a Twitter feed. Every so often, a profile will be sent to our Twitter account so that people in the entire world can see new information about Black mathematicians. Here is a tweet that was sent out not too long ago featuring the late Laren Clarkson, who is a professor in the math department at Texas Southern University. Now that we have the new MADDER pages, we decided that we really needed to keep the information up to date, and we thought that this would be perfect as a project for a math history RU. The very first time that we tried this was actually part of the Pomona Research in Mathematics experience. PRIME itself is an NSF-funded RU, and in the summer of 2020, we hired 8 undergraduates that would help to update the pages. Actually, there were 3 goals that this research group had. The first was to work on a database that would provide information about Black mathematicians in the mathematical sciences. That is, we knew that we had 700 or so names coming from the old MADDER pages, and so we wanted to try to make sure that this information was up to date. Remember that Scott Williams had not updated the pages since 2010, about 10 years prior. The 8 students in the RU were to, number 1, add a photo if one was missing. Number 2, update the employment information. Remember that this was at least 10 years old. And number 3, find contact information for these individuals, including an email address and a website. That summer, we were able to update all but 70 names out of the 700 name database. The second goal that summer was to write biographies of Black mathematicians. We knew from the original MAD page that there were some biographies, but as I mentioned before, this information would be at least 10 years old, and we knew that other names from the MAD pages had no information at all. The summer 2020, we were able to update 54 biographies of the 700 or so names in the database. And the third goal was for the students to attend biweekly colloquia, seminars that took place on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so that they could learn more of other Black mathematicians who were working in the same vein to try to learn information about other Black mathematicians. Our 12 virtual seminars all have been recorded, and all but 2 appear on YouTube. Let me spend some time saying thank you to the staff that we had from summer 2020. I was the PI, and Amy Oden was our administrative assistant. The 8 students involved with the program are Malik Kanta, who's a student at Pomona, Nevin Etter, who was an undergrad at Washington and Lee, Jonathan Fair, who was at Southern University, Ramoy Hammond from the University of Connecticut, CJ, Charles Harnett, from Vanderbilt University, Jasmine James from Central Washington, Alexis Kelly from UC Merced, and Jayla Langford from Purdue. Again, I'm very grateful for all of these students for all of the remarkable work that they did in summer 2020, getting all of this information together. If you'd like to learn more about actually their final presentation, all of that's been recorded as well, and it appears here on this link on YouTube. That was summer 2020, but we knew that we still needed to continue to update the information that appeared in the database. Robin Wilson and I received funding from CURM to have students from Pomona College and Cal Poly Pomona to work together during the academic year to form research assistantships. That summer, that academic year, there were again 3 goals that we wanted our students to focus on. The first was to continue researching and writing biographies. We wanted our students to work for at least 2 hours a week so that they would present and produce a minimum of 4 biographies every week. Number 2, we wanted our students to focus on database quality control. We had known from previous years that the students had gone through, updated by looking at some photos and some email addresses, but we still thought that that information needed a second set of eyes to go through just to make sure that the picture really was of the right person and the email really is the correct email address. We wanted our students to work for at least an hour a week, updating a minimum of 4 profiles every week. And the third that we wanted our students to do was attend research meetings every week. We had originally planned to alternate having meetings between Cal Poly Pomona one week and Pomona College the other week. The 2 schools are only about 3 miles or 15 minutes away from each other. At these weekly research meetings, we wanted the students to A, give progress reports on the profiles they had updated, B, exchange drafts of written biographies with other students so that they could provide feedback, and C, discuss assignments of names that they should work on for the coming week. All of this were goals that we thought we could do, but then COVID hit, and we had to alter some of these goals and some of the ideas that we had in mind. I'll come back and talk about that in just a moment. Let me first say a little bit about the staff that we have working with us throughout this year. As I mentioned before, I'm the PI at Pomona College, and Robin Wilson is the co-PI at Cal Poly Pomona. Brian Bishop, an undergraduate at Pomona College, is our administrative assistant. The 8 students that we have from Pomona College are Daniel Agbayo, Dante Christian, Tiana Couch, Camille English, Tadius Frank, Rhea Lee, Christina Marsh, and Virgil Munyamada. The 5 students we have at Cal Poly Pomona are Natasha Arnold, Brandon Douglas, Aaron Sewell, Ciara Thomas, and Devin Woodfine. Robin and I have been very impressed by all of the work that the students have put in this summer, and we've been really grateful about the time and effort. Plus, we've had a really great time working with this group of 13, just learning from each other and trying to find out more information about Black mathematicians. Here's a quick screenshot of the individuals that we have here at Pomona College. As I've mentioned, because of COVID-19, we've had to work online, and we still haven't had the opportunity for all 15 of us to get together in a single place. But we are optimistic that we'll be able to have this opportunity before the academic year is done. Now, because of COVID, we weren't able to do exactly the goals that we had planned out in the original proposal to CURM. Instead, we decided that we would have our 13 students to break down into 3 research subgroups. Each research subgroup will be led by one of the co-PIs, and we'd have each research subgroup to focus on a specific question. One of the questions that the groups is focused on is, who are the first African-American women to earn PhDs in mathematics? Robin Wilson is the lead for this subgroup. The second is focused on the question, who are the recent African-Americans to earn PhDs in math? I'm the lead on the second group. And the third group is focused on the question, what are the numbers of African-Americans to receive PhDs in math? Again, I'm the lead for this group. I'd like to spend the last bit of time today discussing what do we know about each of these questions and what directions do we want to move in next. First, let me focus on the question, who are the first African-American women to earn PhDs in mathematics? It seems very timely that there was an article that just appeared in the AMS notices within the last 3 months or so that focused on exactly this question. Who are the first African-American women to receive their PhDs in math? This article does contain a list of Black women, but unfortunately this list doesn't seem to be complete. In working with the students in our research subgroup, you can see here, this is the first time this has ever been seen in public, some of the preliminary data that we have and what we think is the most complete list of Black women to receive their PhDs in math from 1943 up through 1980. This is still a work in progress, but we feel pretty good that there are at least 8 names that appear here on the screen that do not appear in the aforementioned AMS Notices article. Still, we're very hopeful that we'll find the complete list all the way up through present as we continue to work on this research project. Secondly, I'd like to focus on the following question. What are the numbers of African Americans to receive PhDs in mathematics? Fortunately for us, the National Science Foundation already has some of this information collected. There's something called the Survey of Earned Doctorates that keeps track of all PhDs broken down by race, ethnicity, and gender that have been given out in the mathematical sciences from 1980 to present, roughly the last 40 years. Here you can see on your screen a plot of the data that has a breakdown of men versus women. The blue line are the totals, whereas the green line is the number of men that have received their PhDs in math and statistics over the last 40 years, whereas the gray line contains the number of women that have received their PhDs in math and statistics over the last 40 years. Let's deaggregate all of this data based on race and ethnicity. Here on the screen, you can see the numbers of white women, Asian women, Hispanic women, and Black women, respectively, that have received their PhDs in math and statistics over the last 40 years. I want you to pay attention to the gray line at the very bottom of the screen. This is the number of Black women who received their PhDs. While there is a graph here on the screen, we could actually download raw data that will give us specific numbers for each of these 40 years. There's a similar breakdown in the demographics for men who received their degrees. Here we have the total number of degrees broken down by ethnicity of the number of men who received their PhDs in math and statistics over the last 40 years. White men is the gold line, Asian American men is the green line, Hispanic men is the blue line, and Black men is the gray line. Again, we can easily download the exact numbers, not just the graphs, by going here to the website you see at the bottom of the screen. You'll notice here, unfortunately, this data only goes back to roughly 1981. It turns out that the National Science Foundation did not keep track of degrees conferred based on race and ethnicity. This means that if we wanted to have the data before 1981, we would have to find it ourselves. You see here on the screen what has never been shown before. This is our preliminary data of the number of Black PhDs in mathematics from 1925 up through 1975. We're not 100% sure that this is the complete number of Black PhDs, but we're pretty sure at least from 1925 through about 1960 or so that this data is complete. We're still working on this. This is still a work in progress, but we're really happy that we can show you this data as a preliminary set. But what directions would we like to go in next? There are a few things that we would like to do. First, we do want to continue to compile a list of all African Americans to receive their PhDs in the mathematical sciences. Not just the numbers, but we'd like to have the names as well. Second, we would like to establish a center for the history of African Americans in the mathematical sciences. The last several years, we've been working with an RU to get some students to work on the data, now a CURM project to get other students to work on the data, and we'll constantly need a stream of students to continue to update the new information as it comes in. It seems that it would be best to have a center to do all of this. Third, we'd like to run an RU in the summer to help uncover not just the numbers of Black mathematicians, but the mathematics that's actually done by Black mathematicians. And fourth, we'd like to find a way to monetize the web pages to help pay our developers' bill. Remember that this is not just a research project where we're looking at the names and the numbers of individuals, but we are running a website, and we are constantly having developers' bills as we update all of our features and just take care of annual maintenance. So, as Rachel Maddow would say, watch this space and let's see what we can do for the future. Thanks very much for listening.